The president of the College Hill Beer Club. This is our group, and I showed this slide 3 years ago when I talked last time, and I didn't think anybody would remember. I walk in, and the first thing Tom goes, he goes, "What have you brewed lately?" So I've got a nice Nordlander lagering away, and I've got a honey pale ale that's going to be ready for Christmas. So now I was going to put in a picture of the last party we had, which one of the gentlemen here. We had a third year birthday party at the Proton Center. We invited patients back, and we gave tours and just had a kind of reunion and let the people who were treated and the people who did the treating kind of get together. And it was like, I think it was a real nice function. I think we're probably going to have that again, if not yearly, probably every year. So if you don't know, this is the Proton Center. It's 3 years old now. It's on the Liberty campus of Children's Hospital. And it's there for a reason. And this building here, contents included, is a $200 million building. And that came primarily from Children's Hospital. And Children's wanted this center because protons are, without any shadow of doubt, the best way to treat children, because of the way it can spare tissue. And children who have emerging teeth, growing bones, it's very important to miss that, to only radiate what you have to. In us older guys, it may not be quite as important, but it's still not a bad way to treat prostate cancer. So when you talk about protons, it all gets down to this one physical property, that when you accelerate a proton, which is a ion of hydrogen, you get the particle beam goes in, enters, and it doesn't deposit much energy, and then depending on the energy of the beam, it peaks deep in the body and then stops. So you have a very sensitive structure back here, like a child's emerging teeth, or your spine, or the breast, and they will get essentially no radiation. And the difference between that and regular radiation, which current way to treat prostate cancer would be RTOG, it's kind of the standard that's in all local hospitals here, is a standard radiation beam comes in, delivers the highest dose right underneath the skin, and then it falls off. Now, rapidly it falls off, depends kind of on the energy, but you can get fairly deep in the body, but if you want to get a lot of radiation, you have to summate it from a lot of different angles. That's how you get their therapeutic advantage deep inside the body. Whereas a proton beam, you can select the appropriate energies. The beam will go in, it'll go so far, deposit the energy will go off. And that's the whole reason for spending $200 million on a therapy machine. So with the energy that you get from your cyclotron, you get all these peaks, and then you can call on every one of them. So you can just call on these four if that's where the tumor was. And you can and where it really pays for itself is this is a kind of standard treatment for a child's brain tumor where you have to treat down the spine. And what we used to do 30 years ago when I was in that residency is we would just put a single radiation beam coming from the back, and when you get high dose to the spinal cord, where you get all this fall-off dose to the rest of the body, breast, esophagus, stomach, and all these organs have a very high cycle malignancy rate if you live 50 years to develop. And these kids are going to live 70, 80 years with a curing a lot of childhood cancers. And so when IMRT came along, we had a way of kind of stopping it somewhat. We still had a little radiation bleeding into the chest and the lung. With a proton beam, you come in from the back and just stop it. And this is the biggest reason that building is there. And this is just one of the many pediatric examples. And you can kind of see it here in cross-section. This would be a standard radiation beam, and this is a proton beam. And you see how it just perfectly contours around the particular body which you want to treat. With no dose to the airway, no dose to the heart, no dose to the breast. So this is the layout of the building. It's we have a clinical. The front is all clinical, and the back is where all the guts of the machine are. So we have 4 treatment bays that go across the back, and the cyclotron is here, and I'll show you some pictures. It generates the beam, and then when you need it, each room can call the beam in by using the electromagnets and getting it where you want it to go. And this kind of shows that here's the cyclotron. The beam goes down the back, and then depending on which room is ready to treat, it calls the beam in. So when you're in a room, as some of you guys might know with radiation therapy, most of the time in that room is spent lining you up. I mean, they want to make sure you're exactly where you were the day you were set up. So you can have all 3 rooms going and not have any interruption because for the half hour that you may have the patient in the room, the beam may only be on for 5. And this, if you come to our party, you could have gotten a jacket back there. So every once in a while, they have to shut down this thing for maintenance. And so we made sure that when we shut it down, it was during our party. We had people going back and looking at it. It's just kind of a gee whiz sci-fi thing to look at. So this thing weighs, I think, that's 90 tons there, just the metal of it. And they had, when they built the building, they had to drop it down through the ceiling. I think they had to close off part of 75 when they did it too. Tom was telling me, he remembers the story that when they built this machine, they had to decide it's an American company, but they manufactured in Germany. So it had to come across the ocean. And one of the first things they were trying to decide was the best way to get it here. So the options were to bring it to New Orleans and bring it up on a barge, or bring it into Baltimore and bring it in on an industrial truck. Believe it or not, the barge thing was leading the way until there was one bridge on the way to 75 and they couldn't get the truck through. So they had to go to Baltimore. And the funny thing about the Baltimore route is you had to go through several states, and there are restrictions that states put on some of these wide load traffic trucks that you had to use. And they had to stop because one state said you couldn't do it during the daylight, and the next state next door said you couldn't do it at night. So they had to wait for the sun to go down before they could proceed. So currently we have a research gantry, we have an adult gantry, a child gantry. Typically, a working day goes from at 7:30 till sometimes as late as 6 at night. And we usually treat between 22 and 25 patients per room. The kids aren't, it's not as frequent. They have, the nice thing that children have is they have full-time anesthesiologists. A lot of the kids have to be put to sleep to stay still. So they have somebody there to do that for them, that you don't get as many people in and out that way. Oops, too much here. I was trying to bypass it. So this is, again, if you come from our party, you would see it. So the beam comes out of here, and it goes down this line to the back of the building, and then this is the line where these are all magnets. So the beam line is this tube, and these are all magnets along the tube to direct the beam and into which room, where we're going to be. And the reason you can't go back here when it's on is because the radiation dose would be too dangerous. Once you shut it off, there's nothing there. And this gives you an idea, when you go into the room and treat it, you come into a room and you come through this bay right here, and you don't realize there's a floor and a half below you, a floor and a half above you, of nothing but the gantry that turns around and enormous magnets that are basically directing the beam where you want it to go. And I'm still amazed that you can go from that cyclotron down that beam path into this room, and they can send it to within a millimeter of where I tell them to put it. And that just amazes me every time I see it. So this is the gantry, the thing that rotates around you, and being dropped into the room. That's before they put the roof on. Say they drop those in too. And this is what it looks like finished. So this is the table. It's a robotic table that has 9 degrees of freedom. This is the part that rotates around, kind of rotates under the floor out through the ceiling. This is the nozzle of the protons. These are the X-ray units that give us a CT scan. So you rotate around, you get a CT scan. You match it on the computer screen with what you're supposed to have. And then this table automatically puts the last little finishing touches of getting the patient in the right position. There we go. Oops. Stick on me. Make this over. So, let's do this right. All right. So this is what's called a pencil beam proton machine. So the proton machines that were back before, say, the turn of the millennium were scattered. They would basically put a beam in and they would hit a metal target and it would scatter the radiation and you would kind of pick out what you wanted. Because of that, you had a lot of other radiation kind of flying around, a lot of neutrons. With a pencil beam, basically directs this very narrow beam of protons, and it basically treats a kind of an odd shape like this, almost like a 3D printer would print it. Just kind of, and that allows you to get very precise, and also allows you to have very little dose outside of the target area. And this is kind of how this is kind of the third generation of proton machines. The proton machines now also have the built-in CT scanner. The old ones, that was not available. So currently we can do a CT scan of the patient in that position. We use the pencil beam to put the radiation exactly where we want it, so we can do some pretty incredible things with treatment. So we can make, and we can make, again, picture this. This is the adult side of the building. The children, when they build it, they're very picky about their side. So there's a line down the middle of it. That's the children's side, that's the university side. And I was telling my residents, when you go through the middle of the building, it's like going from Kansas to Oz. The children's side is like beautifully decorated, all these things, and then the university side, not quite so much. So, and this is the whole reason that people got excited about it for prostate, was that you can bring in two lateral beams, you can have them summate here, and then you get very little dose even to the femoral heads, you get nothing to the anterior part of the bladder, the posterior part of the rectum. This would be the same type of treatment that you would get with IMRT. You get the same area covered, but the intermediate zone, which would be the green, is much larger, leads into the bladder a lot more, and into the rectum. And you get all this low dose, which is blue, scattered around the soft tissues of the pelvis. Now, where that might help you is that every place you get that low dose radiation is potential for a malignant event to occur. So radiation causes malignancy at a very low level. So you always want to keep the amount of radiation that you get the least amount you possibly can. And protons really help that. The other is that there's a hope that you would get less rectal and bladder side effects.
Is that one beam going through or two beams in?
Two beams coming each direction. This one goes through here, stops there. This one comes through here, stops there. And that's the additive.
And you rotate it then also, so even that trace outside, varies over time?
Yeah, it's the same. With this type of treatment, it's just a lateral beam this way. Because your hips contain it. If you want to say what's going to give you some side effects, it's the dose that's right back here and the dose in the bladder and the rectum. Hips really don't see that. It's a very low level and they don't see the effect. Now, when you don't, I'm treating a guy currently who's got an artificial hip. And we can't treat through it. It's a big hunk of metal right there. So they have a beam coming in like this, and they have a beam coming in like this. So it's like a dog leg. But usually we just keep it simple. Now, for radiation treatments, we usually put a rectal balloon in. Considering using spacer, we're kind of debating whether we want to do that. And this treatment would take between laying down on the table, getting the cone beam CT, aligning you up, moving the table, and then delivering treatments about a half hour. So this kind of tells you what the difference between those two treatments are. And the thing I always emphasize with people who come in and think protons is the best way to treat prostate cancer is that the radiation coverage of the prostate is identical to what you get with IMRT. There's no difference there. The difference is the dose to your bladder and your rectum. So the squares are, this is called the dose volume histogram. So this is zero volume, and this is volumes on this way, doses this way. So this dose is written to 80 gray, and so
particularly here, the difference between the bladder, this low dose of 2,000 is, I can't see, it's about 30% to about 5%. The same thing with that record.
And that's what hopefully gives you a better side effect profile with the treatment.
The second column says approval status, and they all say unapproved. Is that unapproved? Maybe I can't read it correctly.
Where do you see
The
that?
second column after the structure.
Oh, yeah. That just be, what they do is when they show us,
If you're doing a comparative plan for like a insurance company, they'll say, why are we doing this? And we got to show them pictures like this and DVHs. Say, this is why this is so much better. And you send it to them, but it's not approved until we pick one, and then the other ones vanish. So you can't see them together. When you approve one, the other ones go away. You don't do this stuff, use it not approved one, approve one.
How many doses do you do that?
Well, this is an older slide. So this was a 8-week treatment. Currently, I am treating with half that. I do 4 weeks. Taking a page from the Canadian playbook. And so you do that. We'll talk a little bit about that later. That's one of the new things in prostate cancer is that if you increase the dose of the prostate every day, you can finish in half the time. So this 8,000 line is if you were giving 200 to 180 centigrade a day. If you move that up to even 300 a day, you get the same biological effect in 4 weeks instead of 8 weeks.
They do that then 7 days a week or 5 days?
5 days a week. The more precise you are in hitting the target, the more it allows you to give a higher dose of prostate because you're not giving as much dose to directly the bladder, therefore you're not getting side effects, therefore you can ramp up the daily dose. So, I'm an old guy. When I first started treating prostate cancer, you guys can wince at it if you want. You would come in and then they would send the resident me in and we'd put a Foley catheter in it. Because we didn't have CT scans back then. And then in the balloon of the Foley catheter, they blow up heat from coming out, we put contrast. So you'd see this little contrast thing going in, and then you'd see the bulb in the bladder. And then you would get a standard 2-dimensional radiograph coming in from this way, X-ray, and this way. And you get this little crayon out, and you draw where you thought the prostate was. And you could tell, you could do that because you had the urethra lighting up with the catheter or contrast in it, and you would see it. But there's a huge margin of error there. So then the first thing that came along was 3D conformal therapy. That allowed us to use CT scans to identify where the prostate was within the body. And then we could say, okay, we'll bring this beam into this direction, and we know where the prostate is, this one, and we can make our margins a lot more close, a lot more conformal. And the other thing it let us do is that, when you're just looking at a radiograph, I can tell what I'm looking at. It's hit straight this way or straight this way. But if you shoot on a diagonal, the mind really can't figure out the anatomy very well. But the computer doesn't have the problem. So what this let us do is come in from all different directions, let us be much more conformal around the prostate. And then we started with IMRT and atomo therapy, and it's just a way of doing IMRT, where they said, okay, we're going to just come in from every direction. And this machine has basically 60 positions on it, every 6 degrees. And it will turn, shoot, turn, shoot, turn, shoot. And every time it's doing that, the shutter is going in and out and being precise to how the prostate looks in this direction or this direction. It lets you be very conformal around the prostate. But again, what comes in this way goes out this way. So you have this kind of this low dose bath, they call it. And clinically that doesn't cause you any acute effects, but we worry long term what that might do. And this is just it in the coronal, so this is looking from the front, and this is from the lateral. Here's your pubic symphysis, this is your rectum, bladder's up here. Now the thing is you don't get a very good picture on tomo units because it takes with a fairly high-end X-ray. And then this is IMRT, which is a standard treatment now.
And again, you can see that beams come in from, you can kind of see where they're coming in from, where this low dose bath is. You can see how it kind of spreads it around. And that's it from the front and the back. So we were constantly, through the last 30 years, improving our ability with standard radiation. Why this is important is that when proton beam first started, and Loma Linda, I think, was one of the first ones doing a lot of prostate, they didn't have a rotational beam, they just had a beam that came in from the side, I think. We have some of our guys that work at our center now actually came from Loma Linda, and they tell the stories about how things are done. You couldn't do any real-time cone beam CT, and it was a scattering foil, not a tungsten beam. So as protons have gotten better, so does photons. And the IMRT with the photons, the standard X-ray, has gotten pretty good. And the reason that makes a difference is the insurance companies now say, if you do this with a standard radiation beam with an IMRT, and you're going to charge me $30,000, why would I want to do protons at $90,000 when the clinical effect has never been proved to be any different? And they have a bit of a point. So if you're talking about, I always want to say my favorite way to treat prostate cancer, I'm an old brachytherapist, and I've done about 1,000 of these. And this is a really conformal way, so I don't want to say that this is any better or worse. It's another great way to treat localized prostate cancer. And you can see how conformal this is. But this is kind of considered if you're just looking at mapping where the radiation goes, where it's supposed to, it doesn't go over top, it's tough to beat this. And this is the picture that goes on the internet and convinces guys to get protons. Because when people come in, I always tell them, I said, listen, there's a lot of good choices, but if we can't get insurance to pay for this, I'd do something else. And I tell them, and if I had a really good hospital radiation department that did really good IMRT that was next door, or you had to travel 4 hours a day to see me, I'd go next door. So there are a lot of other issues that go into that. But, and the reason is if you look at the old risk stratification for prostate cancer, this is not saying one is better. You can get this curve and this survival with protons, you can get it with IMRT, you can get it with brachytherapy, or you can get it by doing nothing other than watching your PSA. Because these low-risk prostate cancers don't do anything in the first 6 years. They don't do anything in the first 10 years.
What exactly is a biochemical relapse?
So a biochemical relapse means that you treat, PSA goes down a certain bit, and then starts to come back up.
So let's measure the PSA.
Yeah, it's a PSA relapse. And truthfully, most PSA relapses, even when they occur, are not clinically relevant in the low-risk people. So if you look at some series of comparing protons to photons, Mendenhall is University of Florida proton, and they've got a low risk, intermediate, high risk, and these are their five-year biochemical control, 99%. Well, this is Dr. Spratt of Michigan. He's like, well, heck, I can get 99.8. I don't think that's any different than your 99. And these other ones are just as good. Probably the most important thing that determines this number isn't how you're treated. It's the numbers and what you bring to the treatment. So if you kept everybody who was at least in 6, you probably don't need to be treated anyway, and have PSA less than 10, you can do anything and get that curve. And when you start getting into the higher Gleason scores and the higher PSA, that's when it's the difference. And you really have to watch what people put into their series to say how effective something really is. And that's why the only way to really tell the difference between one method versus the other, which we've never done, is to randomize people to say, okay, I'm going to flip a coin, you get IMRT, flip a coin, you get brachytherapy, flip a coin, you get a radical prostatectomy, you flip a coin, and you get protons.
Well, these are, hold on a second, so these are grade 3 toxicities on to liver.
Right, so if you look
at the grade 2, what about, I mean.
So we tend to focus on grade 3 as a profession. So the grade 2, and we'll go into that, they are not much different. So, if and I'll just pick a number, say there's a 10% urinary grade 2 toxicity, and protons improve that by 20%. Well, that takes you from 10 to an 8. That's not statistically significant unless you get 1,000 guys in each arm. So it's very difficult to prove a difference. And if you look at what patients worry about, the grade 2 toxicities are not even considered. So they aren't as tough as grading these treatments as some of the practitioners. And so a lot of people say, well, it doesn't matter what the doctor thinks, it matters what the patient thinks. And they are easier scores than we are in toxicity. So, so I always put this up is if you look at Portec, there's a study I love because they actually did the randomization in England. Nothing more protons, and the curves don't look that much different. And these aren't exactly the same. I just put it up for effect. But if you ask me, what about the cost? Protons would be on the ceiling somewhere if we had one. So if you look at, I keep missing my pointer button. So this is IMRT, and in this day and age, however they decided, trying to calculate what something costs in medicine is a lot like going to your car dealership. You can get a lot of different quotes. So you always have to ask how they're determining the price. But this is IMRT, and I'd say 25,000 is probably a reasonable number relatively for what IMRT costs for a 8-week treatment. And then if you go down, I think this one is radical prostatectomy. The interesting thing was as one comes down, the other one tends to come down. So when we had this, we thought we were doing great because that was when the surgeons were putting people in the hospital for a week and opening them up and doing, and then they got robotics, and all of a sudden you're out of the hospital. That brought their costs way down. But these are kind of the two main players. But if you look at low dose rate brachytherapy, that's under $10,000. And I can tell you when I was at the VA and we were doing 8, or we could do 6 in the morning, that cost is probably down more like $5,000. It was basically the cost of the seats. It's a very economical way to treat prostate cancer.
I have 2 questions. How do you calculate the cost of active surveillance? And what's the cost benefit analysis?
So, good question, I probably answered. So the reason that this goes up, and we'll talk about it a little bit because I do a little bit more about active surveillance here, is that if you look at the best study, and it's that Portec study from Great Britain, half the patients that are being followed over a 10-year period will ultimately get treatment. So that's what this cost is guys falling off surveillance and getting treatment. Because really, if you think about the cost of active surveillance in terms of coming in and getting their PSA checked and all that stuff, it's the same whether you get treated or not. You're getting PSA regular and you're seeing doctors. But it's really, you fall off the surveillance.
Well, I did hear the question about cost benefit on that slide there. If you have something like LDR brachytherapy, do the results turn out the same? Even though in a case, maybe it might take 6 months in one case, but 4 weeks in another. Is that what really driving the cost? Or
you're talking about the cost of this breaking. This is what we charge insurance companies.
Right.
So the cost is like in brachytherapy, you've got the cost. You've got always have the cost of the doctor.
Well, no, but does it achieve the benefit though?
It does, as best we can tell. That's why I said these have never been compared hand-to-hand in a randomized fashion. So you can get a guy who does a lot of brachytherapy, and he'll show you a curve that looks just like the one I showed you. And all he has to do is control who he treats. I'm going to treat at least in 6s and 7s, their PSA will be less than 10. And then he's going to look great. Because he didn't even treat in the first place. Like, I remember Newsweek had an article on prostate cancer. This must have been 10, 15 years ago. And I knew one of the guys who was in the article. And it's Dr. Merrick from
West
Virginia. And they said he's never had a recurrence. And the reporter said, oh, that must mean he's really good. And I read that and said, oh, that must mean he's treating the wrong people. That's the same thing.
Dr. Narek. He's one of the best known brachytherapists in the country. I've read some of his studies, and I was noticing that what he considers high risk, if you look at the tables, the median Gleason score for his high risk population is 7.4.
Right. But I can tell you, back when he was doing most of his brachytherapy, Gleason 7 isn't what a Gleason 7 is today. There's my humble opinion, nobody's saying this but me, is that when I was in residency, I had Gleason 4s, I had Gleason 5s, I had Gleason 6s. I haven't seen a Gleason, anything less than a Gleason 6 in 15 years. I think there's been a little bit of inflation with Gleason scores. And the other thing is remember, all this data was when we were randomly sticking needles in two sides of the prostate and say, that's what you got. Well, if you get an MRI-directed biopsy, you're going to find stuff that you won't find in the report, so it doesn't mean the same thing. So that's the problem with a lot of these studies, is you have to take historical factors in. You know, we get better at finding things. And then you try to compare it to how guys were doing it 20 years ago, when the technology wasn't as good, the imaging wasn't as good, and that leads to a lot of false assumptions on what the results mean. So you have to take all that in with a big grain of salt. I'm a bit of a skeptic, so you'll see that as the talk goes on. So I didn't want to bore people who sat through this 3 years ago, is what I talked about last time. So I thought, well, let me just, what do I think is new since the last time we talked? So the first one in terms of protons, and this one is supposed to be talked about, is that the number of restrictions in commercial insurance for the use of protons in prostate cancer has gone up dramatically.
What percent of potential claims will the insurance company accept for proton? Maybe half of them get it covered, or 3/4, you have an idea?
No, it's a moving target. Like some people will, we're not supposed to tell them, but like in this open enrollment period, they'll say, well, if I want to get protons, what insurance should I buy this year? You know, and I tell them, I can tell you what, I'm not supposed to, but I can tell you it will undoubtedly change in the next 3 months. I will tell you that the one carrier that universally accepts protons is Medicare. So what the federal government says is we've now got, I think we're up to about 35 proton centers in the United States. Probably every town the size of Cincinnati, I think Oklahoma is going to need a center. Because there's going to be certain things that we can do better than we haven't figured out yet, but there will be. And they wanted us to generate data to say, okay, we'll let you do this, but you got to keep data so that we can go back 10 years and decide what we've done. So Medicare pays almost all the time. Sometimes you can get a secondary insurance carrier that will give you some grief, but the Children's hired pretty sharp nurses to battle with them, so that's kind of fun.
You said that there were approximately 34 centers around the United States that all accept Medicare?
I don't know.
You do know.
Yeah. But that is one of the things Medicare doesn't pay it much.
I'm sorry?
The Medicare, they pay what they're going to pay.
Yeah.
And like a lot of things with Medicare, commercial insurance subsidizes the Medicare patients because they pay more. That's all the difference. So again, so that's one issue. The other is the use of active surveillance. I got some slides on that. When I talked here 3 years ago, if you looked at SEER data and Medicare data, the active surveillance was probably up around 40%. It's probably much higher than that now. We use MRI for the prostate. We're using it. We don't quite know what we're doing, but we're imaging a lot more with MRI. And I always tell my residents, I said, anytime you see any of this, and there isn't you haven't been doing it for at least 10 years, you really don't know what you're doing with prostate cancer. Because you know that curve for 10 years doesn't change. So you can do anything. You can say you're treated with Lucky Charms, so it would do just as well. The biggest thing I wanted to bring out is the number of fracture radiation treatments is starting to drop. And this is all out of Canada, because in Canada, and we're very lucky in the United States that if you want to be treated with radiation, and you're in a city the size of Cincinnati, you could probably throw a rock and hit three radiation oncologists in any direction. You know, there's a lot of capacity here, and you don't have to go very far. In Canada, most of their population is spread out, particularly in the western part of Canada, and these guys would have to either stay in the provincial capital where the radiation therapy is, or they have to drive an enormous house. And so they said, well, it'd be really great in a rural community if we could just really cut those, if we could just cut the number in half, it would be fantastic. So they started just scrunching it down and said, okay, we're going to do this for a while. And if we were using 40, let's try 30. And up the dose a bit, make it kind of biologically equivalent, and there's a formula for that. And they looked at it and said, oh, that's pretty good. And they got it down to 4 weeks, and their data looks really good. So I have accepted that, and it's probably what I should do. The other thing that is new is the use of SpaceOAR for rectal spacing. I'll have some slides on that. And the last thing is we are just on the dawn of what all this genetic testing means. We don't really know, but I think in 10 years we're going to know a lot. So I will tell you there's one instance where I think protons for prostate cancer is going to offer a big benefit, and that's if in the more locally advanced setting, when you want to cover lymph nodes in the pelvis, I can do that with a proton beam and be much less toxic. So this is the proton side. And so this is one where they're treating, that's the top of this cut, you just got the seminal vesicles, you're going up and you're getting pelvic lymph nodes. And this is the sagittal cut, and these are the periodic and pelvic lymph nodes that are in front of the spine. If you try to do the same thing with IRT, you see how much, kind of how the dose starts leaking out all over the place. But if you look on sagittal, you see all this valve in there. And this is kind of old-fashioned radiation therapy. When we would treat the old-fashioned way back 30 years ago, we would tell guys, go buy some Imodium. Keep it in the medicine cabinet. You're going to need it. You may not need it week 1, 2, and 3, but when you need it, you're going to want it right now. Because everybody will get diarrhea. So now, with this type of treatment, very little change to that happen, much less so than this. So I think this is the one instance where I think I can really make an argument with insurance companies that I need to do this. So we talked about the shifting patterns, and this goes up to 2015. It takes a while to get this data out. So you can see this is active surveillance, and it's down up to 40% of the low-risk prostate cancer. It probably should be 80. This is radiotherapy, falling off, and this is radical prostatectomy. There's been a much wider acceptance of lots of ways.
Radiotherapy is becoming less popular than surgery?
Mm-hmm. But you got to remember that these are national statistics. There's the differences in localities can be tremendous, and there's a lot of reasons for it. I'm going into that if you want to. And so I got a lot of these slides. There was a recent national meeting in Chicago in September, and I just went through all the prostate talks, and I just tried to pull those slides I thought you guys might find a little bit interesting as a way to kind of round out the talk. So one guy got up and said, yeah, we're talking about dose reduction, maybe we don't need to be treating, and he said maybe the reason we don't need to be treating this high dose is maybe 0 is the right dose, that we don't need to be treating this at all. So this clot is I believe this is from Scandinavia, and they have the longest trial of basically following guys with low-risk prostate cancer. And you can see that their cause-specific survival, in other words, you're dying of prostate cancer, it's a very rare event, even over 15 years. Now you'll see that on surveillance, after 15 years, a quarter of the guys got tired of following the prostate PSA go up, and so they get treated. And in 15 years, still half have not been treated, but that means half did, half didn't, and that's because PSA. What we don't know, and every time we put anybody in active surveillance, they say, okay, we're going to watch my PSA. When are we going to? When do we cross that line and I have to have treatment? And I have to say, I don't know. I said, we'll talk about it, because there's no absolute trigger to say this is when you need to get your prostate treated. Because all of us have prostates, all it's men, sorry, and
As we get older, our prostate gets bigger and our PSA goes up. So that's why the normal PSA for an 80-year-old might be a 10. Normal for a 50-year-old might be 2. We've always picked 4 as the line. It's just an artificial number.
What about the 2.8 developed metastatic disease? Does that refer to either of those graphs up above?
Mm-hmm.
Or just the entire population?
So this is the graph. So again, 2.8% will develop metastatic disease. And our residents hate active surveillance because they've gone to medical school to do things. And they hate not doing something. And we'll see the patient and they'll say, what do you think? I said, I'll probably tell them just to watch it. And then you can just see their eyeballs almost coming out of their head. And they'll say, what if he fails? And I said, well, that's a possibility. I said, but you know, if I watch 100 guys and 2 fail, you're going to tell me you blew it because you didn't treat that patient. If you treat those same 100 guys and 2 fail, you're not going to say, I blew it. You're going to say, oh, thank God I treated them, even, you know, and I kept. But, you know, chances are the people are going to fail regardless of who you select treatment. That's the whole concept of active surveillance. That's a big thing for people to digest and accept. Yes?
Could you define low risk?
Yeah. So low risk is Gleason 6, PSA less than 10. Ultra low risk is Gleason 6, PSA less than, I think, 4.
Could you speak up? Say again?
So low risk is Gleason 6, and PSA at the time for biopsy, PSA less than 10. Ultra low risk is the PSA less than 4. And I always wonder how they find those ultra low risk guys because the PSA was never high enough for them to get the biopsy. They probably didn't need it. So that's the risk categories. So the current risk categories are stratified by Gleason score and PSA when you start. Okay? So, and then you have intermediate risk, and then you have high risk. High risk is Gleason 8, 9, and 10, automatically much high risk. Okay? Or if you have a 7 and your PSA is, I always have to look at it, really high, over 20. So, but in the intermediate risk, what they found is it's always easy to find the people that really need treatment, and then find the people that really don't need treatment. It's that big group in the middle who might need it, it might not. And so you have Gleason 7s who are candidates for active surveillance. So if you're Gleason 7 and your PSA is less than 10, you're probably okay not doing anything. If you're a Gleason 7 and your PSA is 19, that puts you in a whole different risk category. They're all called intermediate. So then when they figured this out, they said, okay, we're going to have low risk, we're going to have high risk, we're going to have intermediate, we're going to have low intermediate, we're going to have high. So we're starting to kind of parse people out into risk categories. And we've gone about as far as we can with PSA and Gleason score. And number of courses is kind of in there, but I'm not a real fan of that. So
One thing is sometimes been brought up in some of our group meetings that people will have a second analysis done, say at Johns Hopkins or someplace else. And from just listening to people, I would say about half of them confirmed, but half of them gave a different reading. Now, when you talk about these risk categories, that's just based on one biopsy.
And how do you know Johns Hopkins is right when people didn't read it?
Well, I'm not saying they're right, but they're inconsistent.
Right. So, but people look at a Gleason score and they view it as this absolute God-given, written in stone number. I said, no, that's just one guy or gal looking under a microscope and making a judgment. And doctors make all sorts of judgments. And it's based on sampling. Where did you put the needle at the time that you got the biopsy? And it also depends on the pathologist reading it. And think about this. The pathologist. But what if you're a pathologist and you know that if you call something a Gleason 7, it'll get treated, and if you call it 6, it won't? And that's going to affect how you read that slide. We're human. It might. Let's get on to the spin toast. So this is the study that kind of blew everybody's doors off in terms of watching prostate cancer. The English did it. They screened. They picked out a bunch of people from started out with 450,000 men. They screened with PSAs, and I think they detected 2,600. They got 500 per men that agree to a randomization, you know, getting 500 each category: surgery, radiation, or active monitoring. The radiation wasn't that fancy. Some got hormones, some didn't. The surgery, they really, you know, they just got whatever surgery was done at the local hospital. And this is England, and this is National Health Service, so I don't know what they did. And this is the interesting thing is, this is up there, is people who got randomized to radiotherapy or surgery, they got treated. And this is the group that got treated under active surveillance. So at 10 years, over half the people got treated. That's probably reflecting the fact that we don't really know what's the triggering mechanism. Is it a certain PSA? If you get that high, you should start treatment. It's a very crude measurement. It's probably not what we should be doing, but we don't really know what we should be doing. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty, there is a natural inclination among doctors and patients, well, I better go and have treatment. It's not saying that they should have been treated, it's saying they were treated. These are the survival curves for that group. In this group, 75% were released in 6, 25% were released in 7. This is the cancer-specific survival, and you don't have to go to medical school to say those lines are all the same. This is patients without disease progression, and these are the active surveillance people, and there's a little tail here, and people say, that must mean that they're failing and these aren't. Well, it may mean it, but it also could be that their PSA caused doctors to look at something that they otherwise wouldn't have.
It seems that surgery and radiation have almost identical results. Which one actually does which? And as we saw on the previous slide, that radiation.
See, I'm failing here because you didn't say watching it has exactly. You didn't say watching it has exactly the same result.
No, I'm just talking about the radiation.
I know.
And
yeah, so
which one is least expensive or yields a better quality of life for the patient?
We'll go into that. So the other thing, so what they summarize is that if you of these people that had active monitoring, prostatectomy, or radiotherapy, the active monitoring people had similar survival than the other two groups. At 10 years, there was no difference in cause-specific mortality, although the surgery and radiotherapy people had lower incidence of disease progression and metastasis. Patterns and side effects of varied improvement and declining urinary, sexual, and bowel function differ among the treatments. So if you look at, this is a complicated graph, but I can summarize it real quickly. Radiation has worse rectal side effects. Surgery has worse urinary side effects. They both have worse sexual side effects than doing nothing. Okay?
And what was the worst effect of radiation therapy?
Rectal bleeding.
I'm sorry?
Rectal bleeding.
Oh.
Usually it's of no consequence, but it scares the bejesus.
But you guys don't have that as much because you rotate the patient, correct?
Right, but I mean, you're still gonna, no matter how you treat the patient with either brachytherapy, protons, or whatever, unless you do the spacer thing and you push that rectal mucosa away from what you need to treat, you're always going to get some rectal mucosa in the treatment, and it'll always prone you to have a little bleed. That probably doesn't mean anything. And usually what I tell my patients is ignore it. If it persists, we'll do a colonoscopy. You can't have one in 5 years. And if we know it's not a colon cancer further upstream, we're just going to watch it. And it usually always goes away. Same thing with urinary side effects.
Is it just bleeding, or is it incontinence too?
Rectal incontinence? I very rarely see that. The one time I had a guy who just was not happy. He had rectal incontinence. And I never had that. And it took a year, and finally his doctor figured out he had ulcerative colitis. And that was the reason he was having incontinence issues. But again, if you're worried about side effects, the best way to be treated is to watch it. Yes?
It sounds as if the spacer is the savior for the rectum, so why would you not do it?
I've got slides just for you.
Well, the Protect trial was done over many years, way before they invented spacer, right? Right before they invented
Before they had iron, a lot of these were just 3D. I would imagine, knowing what they had in England, probably most of those were 3D conformal.
Right.
I would suspect a lot of these prostatectomies were open, non-robotic. And I could tell you all about what I think about robotic prostatectomies too. that would get you in trouble. And again, just the bottom line on all these things, and then if you look at, they did a physical health score, and a mental health score, and an anxiety profile, and a depression profile, and at the end of the day, everyone was pretty happy with what they did. So whenever guys come to me, they say, and they get paralyzed by analysis, should I have surgery, should I have radiation, should I have proton, should I have an implant? I said, this is what I think the pluses and minuses of everything is. You go home and think about it, and just come up with something you're comfortable with. I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10 a year from now, no matter what you pick, you're going to come back happy. Because your PSA is going to be down, and you think that means something, and your side effect profile is going to be very low. I mean, the incidence of severe GU and GI toxicities is in the range of 1 out of 50 in any of these treatment methods. So you're going to be happy with what you did. And that reflects in these mental health scores and these anxiety tests.